She smiled when she said it. That's the part I can't shake. Not a nervous smile. Not a sad one. A relieved one. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for months and she'd finally set it down on my chest and walked away. He can give me the life you never could, Harrison. I was standing in our kitchen, the kitchen of the house we bought together 8 years ago in Frisco, Texas, the one with the bay window Camille had picked out specifically because the morning light hit the breakfast table just right, and I was holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago because I'd been in my home office since 5 a.m., preparing a $37 million contract for a client. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at her, and she didn't look guilty. She didn't look scared. She just looked ready. Like she'd rehearsed this. Like she'd stood in the bathroom mirror that morning and practiced the exact angle of her chin when she said it. Brent understands the kind of life I want. You've never understood that. Brent Holloway, her boss, the managing director of a commercial real estate development firm called Pinnacle Group, headquartered in uptown Dallas. I'd shaken the man's hand at 3 different company holiday parties. I'd let Camille take his calls at dinner because she said he only contacted her after hours when it was urgent. I'd looked the other way 100 times because I trusted my wife. I set the coffee mug down on the counter, very carefully, like it mattered. Okay, I said. She blinked. That wasn't the response she was expecting. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Brent Holloway had submitted a request to my firm 6 weeks earlier, that his company was in the middle of a $37 million acquisition deal that was about to fall apart, that in less than 3 weeks, his entire project hinged on a single contract review and negotiation that only one attorney in Dallas had the specific expertise to handle. And that attorney was me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because this story didn't start when Camille left. It started the moment I realized that the life I thought I was building wasn't the life she was ever interested in living. Before we go any further, if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely, if you've ever had to pick yourself up off the floor and figure out who you are without a person who was supposed to be your partner, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment below telling me what you're going through. Because this channel exists for exactly those moments. Like this video if you've stayed until now. It helps more people find these stories, and I read every single comment. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Harrison Cole. I'm 44 years old. I'm a corporate contracts attorney at a firm called Meridian Legal Group, based in downtown Dallas on Commerce Street. I've spent 19 years building a reputation in commercial real estate transactions, mergers, and high-stakes acquisition deals. I'm not a flashy guy. I drive a 4-year-old Lexus. I wear suits that are good, but not extravagant. I work a lot. Maybe too much. That was always the argument. I met Camille 12 years ago at a fundraising dinner for a children's hospital benefit at the Perot Museum in Dallas. She was working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-size commercial real estate firm at the time, and she was the kind of woman who could light up a room without appearing to try. Dark hair, quick laugh, smart eyes. She had this way of listening to you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I was gone after the first conversation. We dated for 2 years, got married at a venue in Southlake, bought a house in Frisco when the neighborhood was still developing, back when the commute felt like a trade-off worth making. We talked about kids, talked about building something that would last, and for a long time, I genuinely believed we were doing exactly that. I want to tell you something about those early years, because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. Camille and I were genuinely good together in the beginning. Not in a fairy tale way. We argued, we had rough patches. We had the ordinary friction of 2 people who grew up differently learning to share a life. But there was a real current between us. A shorthand. She could make me laugh harder than anyone I've ever known, which is not a small thing for a man whose default mode is measured and controlled. And I like to think I gave her something too. Stability, maybe, or a kind of steady groundedness that felt like safety when she needed it. The first 4 or 5 years in the house in Frisco were good. We had dinners with friends. We took vacations, a trip to Portugal the year after we bought the house, a long weekend in New Mexico the following fall. We had routines that felt chosen rather than fallen into. Mornings where we actually sat at that bay window table with coffee and talked about things that mattered. I don't want to oversimplify the decline or flatten it into something cleaner than it was. Marriage is complicated terrain, and the middle of it, the long middle, is not something anyone prepares you for. The passion of early years becomes something quieter, which can be either depth or distance depending on the day and how carefully you're tending it. I wasn't tending it carefully enough. I'm honest about that. But somewhere along the way, I can't pin down the exact year, honestly, Camille shifted. It wasn't one conversation. It wasn't one argument. It was a slow, quiet drift. The kind you don't notice until you look up one day and realize the person across the dinner table has been somewhere else for a long time. She took a job at Pinnacle Group about 4 years ago. Brent Holloway had recruited her personally. He'd seen her at an industry networking event in the design district and apparently told her she was wasted at her current firm. She came home that night electric, the most alive I'd seen her in months. I was happy for her, genuinely. Pinnacle Group paid her better. She got a title she was proud of, Director of Marketing and Brand Strategy. The hours were long, but she seemed energized instead of drained, which felt like a good sign. I told myself it was a healthy thing. She was thriving. What husband wouldn't want that? I know now what I was telling myself instead of seeing clearly. The changes came gradually. Later dinners, more frequent work events I wasn't invited to. A new habit of keeping her phone face down. A distance in her eyes that appeared so slowly I almost mistook it for maturity. I'm good at reading contracts. I find the things people try to hide in language for a living. But I was terrible at reading the silence in my own house. About 8 months before she left, I came home from a 4-day trip to Houston, where I'd been finalizing a major acquisition deal for a client. I brought her flowers from the airport. Not because it was a special occasion, just because I'd seen them and thought of her. She looked at them the way you look at something that reminds you of a mistake. She smiled. She put them in a vase. She thanked me. And something about the way she did it told me we were in trouble. I didn't push. I didn't ask. I went back to work, because work was the language I knew how to speak, and the space between us felt too fragile to poke at directly. I told myself I'd make time. I told myself we'd take a trip. I told myself things would settle. They didn't. The morning Camille told me she was leaving, I had been up since before dawn. I had a major contract on my desk, a commercial acquisition in the uptown Dallas corridor that my client, a development group out of Nashville, had been pursuing for 18 months. $37 million, dozens of moving parts. I'd been working 16-hour days for 2 weeks straight. She came downstairs around 7:30. She was dressed, bag packed. I noticed the bag before I noticed her expression, and for a fraction of a second I thought she was going on a work trip. Then she said it. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me, Harrison. I put down my coffee. I've been unhappy for a long time, she said. And I've tried to make this work, but I think we both know this isn't what either of us needs anymore. I asked her if there was someone else. She didn't hesitate. Yes. I asked her who. She told me, Brent Holloway, her boss. The man whose company holiday parties I'd attended with a glass of wine and a firm handshake, making polite conversation about the Cowboys and the commercial real estate market while apparently my marriage was dissolving. He's different, Harrison, she said. He sees me. He understands the kind of life I want. Dinners, travel, being around people who are building real things. You come home and you go straight to your office. You work at 5 in the morning. I feel like I'm living alone. I want to be fair here. There's truth in that. I know there's truth in that. I have always worked too much. That's not a defense. It's a fact. I am the kind of man who finds meaning in the work, and I have not always found the right balance between that and the person standing in the same house. But there's a difference between a marriage struggling with one partner's work habits and a marriage that ends because the other partner has been building an exit for over a year. He can give me the life you never could, she said, and she smiled. I think about that smile still. Not with bitterness, or not only with bitterness. I think about it because it was honest. Because for a woman who had been careful for months, who had kept her face perfectly arranged whenever she came home late, or put her phone in her pocket when I walked into the room, in that moment, she let me see exactly who she was. She wasn't sad. She wasn't torn. She had made her choice long before this conversation, and she was relieved to finally say it out loud. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I'd like to say it was dignity that kept me quiet, but honestly, I think it was shock. The specific silent shock of realizing that everything you thought was solid has been hollow for a long time. "Okay," I said again. She picked up her bag. She said her lawyer would be in touch. She walked out the front door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I went back to my home office and kept working on the contract. I need to tell you about the contract. 6 weeks before Camille left, a file landed on my desk at Meridian Legal Group. It came through our business development coordinator, a standard referral from a commercial real estate broker we'd worked with before. A company called Pinnacle Group was in the middle of acquiring a mixed-use development property in the Uptown Dallas corridor. The deal had been in motion for over a year. They were at the final stage, contract review and negotiation, and their existing legal team had hit a wall. The seller's attorneys had introduced a series of highly technical contingency clauses that were disrupting the timeline and threatening to collapse the entire deal. Pinnacle Group needed a specialist, specifically someone with deep experience in commercial acquisition contract law in Texas, with a track record of negotiating complex contingency structures under deadline pressure. That's a fairly specific skill set. There aren't many attorneys in Dallas who fit that profile at the level Pinnacle needed for a deal of this size. My name came up. Here is what I want you to understand about how I operate professionally. When a file comes to my desk, I evaluate it on its merits. I look at the deal structure, the legal complexity, the timeline, the client. I don't look at the client's personal life. I don't research who they're dating or what they do on weekends. That's not how I work. That's not how any ethical attorney works. So when the file came in and the client was listed as Pinnacle Group, and the managing director requesting representation was Brent Holloway, I didn't make any connection to Camille for several days. Their relationship, whatever it was at that point, wasn't something I was aware of yet in any real concrete sense. I had suspicions. I had a feeling in the back of my chest that I kept pushing down. But I didn't know. I accepted the case. I met with Brent Holloway twice in the following 2 weeks. Conference rooms, professional settings. He was polished, the kind of man who presents well. Good suit, confident posture, the easy authority of someone who's used to being the most important person in the room. He looked at me the way powerful men sometimes look at attorneys, like we're a useful tool, sophisticated but ultimately in service of their goals. He didn't know who I was. I mean, he knew my name and my firm and my reputation, but he didn't know I was Harrison Cole, husband of Camille Cole, who worked for him. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if Camille knew I was working on his deal. She never mentioned it. I never brought it up. And by the time she left, I had already done most of my preliminary work on the file and had said nothing about the conflict of interest to anyone, including myself. But here is where ethics matter. And here is where I have to be completely honest with you about what happened. Because I'm not the villain of this story, but I'm also not going to pretend I handled everything perfectly. The morning after Camille left, I sat in my office for a long time before I picked up the phone. I called my managing partner, a man named Douglas Hart, who'd been practicing law in Dallas for over 30 years. I told him everything. I told him about Camille. I told him about Brent. I told him I had become aware of a personal conflict of interest with our current client that required his attention. Douglas was quiet for a moment. "Are you asking to be removed from the case?" he asked. I thought about it. I thought about it carefully. "No," I said. "The conflict doesn't affect my ability to represent the client competently and ethically. My personal situation with his employee has no bearing on the legal work. But you should know, and it should be documented." Douglas agreed. We documented it. We had our ethics counsel review the situation. The conclusion was that while the conflict was real and required disclosure, it didn't necessitate withdrawal given the nature of the legal work and the absence of any adversarial interest between my personal situation and the client's legal needs. Brent Holloway was informed of the personal connection. Not the details, those were mine, but enough that he understood his attorney and his employee had a personal history. He didn't withdraw from the representation. I'll let you sit with that for a moment. The man who had been in a relationship with my wife for God knows how long, who had watched her walk out of my marriage on a Tuesday morning. He found out that the attorney handling his $37 million deal was her husband, and he decided to keep going. Maybe he didn't think I'd find out the details. Maybe he figured I was a professional and would stay in my lane. Maybe he was arrogant enough to believe it didn't matter. Or maybe, and I think this is closer to the truth, he simply didn't think about me as a person at all. I was a service provider. He had a deal to close. That was the whole equation. I want to pause here and tell you what those first few weeks were actually like, because this isn't a story where I went home and cried for a day and then emerged triumphant and unbothered. It was harder than that. The house felt enormous. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean it literally felt like the rooms had expanded. The kitchen with the bay window, the hallway where Camille had hung a print she bought at a gallery in the Bishop Arts District, the bedroom where I still slept on my side of the bed out of habit. I called my brother Ryan, who lives in Austin. He came up for a weekend and we sat on the back porch in the dark drinking beer and not saying much, which was exactly what I needed. My colleague and closest friend at the firm, a woman named Patricia, who has survived 2 divorces and is tougher than anyone I've ever met in a courtroom, sat across from me at lunch one day and said, "Harrison, you're going to be okay. Not today. Maybe not for a while, but you're going to be okay." I believed her. I didn't feel it yet, but I believed her. I threw myself into work, which is what I always do, which is partly why I was in this situation in the first place. But here's the thing about work when you're in pain. Sometimes the focus is a gift. Sometimes having something concrete and complex to solve is the thing that keeps your brain from eating itself alive. The Pinnacle Group deal was complex. The seller's attorneys had introduced contingency clauses tied to environmental assessments and zoning approval timelines that were designed, I was fairly certain, to give the seller maximum flexibility to walk away from the deal with minimal penalty. It was good lawyering on their side. My job was to neutralize it without blowing up the transaction. I worked on that contract for 3.5 weeks straight. I mean worked. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. I negotiated with the seller's legal team 4 times. I restructured 3 major clauses. I introduced a performance bond provision that protected my client's position on the zoning timeline in a way the other side hadn't anticipated and couldn't easily argue against. It was some of the best legal work I've done in my career. I know that sounds strange given everything happening in my personal life at the time, but there's something clarifying about operating at the edge of your ability while your heart is breaking. You find out what you're actually made of. The deal closed on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on McKinney Avenue. Bright afternoon light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Downtown Dallas spread out below us. I sat across from the seller's team, with my client's representatives on either side, and we finalized the last signatures on a $37 million commercial acquisition. It was a good deal. My client got what they needed. The deal that had been on the verge of collapsing was closed. The contingency issues were resolved. The timeline held. Brent Holloway was in the room. He shook my hand when it was over. "Outstanding work," he said. And he meant it. I could hear that he meant it, which was a strange thing to receive from him. Of all people. "You saved this deal, Harrison. I want you to know that." I looked at him. I shook his hand. I said thank you. He had no way of knowing, or maybe he did and chose not to think about it, that I had been working on his deal for weeks while the life I thought I had was being packed into boxes in Frisco. That the morning Camille walked out, I had gone back to my desk and kept working on his contract. That the legal expertise he was praising me for had been developed over 19 years of long mornings and late nights that had, apparently, not been enough. I want to be careful here. I'm not telling you this story as a revenge story. I'm not telling you Brent Holloway got what was coming to him. I'm telling you this story because of what happened after the deal closed, because of what I found out later, and because of what Camille said to me the one time we spoke after the divorce process began. The divorce proceedings started in November. We had no children, which made certain things simpler, and others, in a different way, harder. We had the house, assets, and 12 years of a life that needed to be divided into halves. Camille had retained an attorney from a firm in Addison. I handled my own representation through a family law colleague at a different firm. Douglas made sure there were no conflicts there either. Our attorneys did most of the communicating. Camille and I didn't talk much directly. She called me once. I almost didn't answer. But I'm curious by nature. It's part of what makes me a decent attorney. And I wanted to hear her voice to see if it sounded different now. If the relief I'd seen on her face that morning had settled into something else. "I just want you to know," she said, that this wasn't about not loving you. I did love you. I do. But I need a different life. I asked her if she was happy. A pause. I think I will be. I asked her if she knew Brent was working with my firm before she left. Another pause. Longer this time. No, she said. I didn't know. And I believed her. Because Camille has always been a lot of things, but she's not a strategic thinker in that way. She makes decisions from feeling, not from architecture. The timing was a coincidence, a genuinely strange one, but a coincidence. Okay, I said, for the third time in this story. We hung up. What I found out 2 months later came from Patricia, my colleague, who heard it from a commercial broker we both know. Gossip travels fast in the Dallas real estate world. The circles overlap constantly. Attorneys, brokers, developers, they all know each other, they all talk. Pinnacle Group's deal had closed, but in the months following, something else had started to unravel. An internal audit at Pinnacle Group had surfaced some irregularities in the financial reporting tied to earlier projects. Not the acquisition I'd worked on, but older deals. The kind of thing that can sit quietly in the background for years before someone pulls the right thread. The audit findings were serious enough that the Pinnacle Group board had requested a review of Brent Holloway's leadership. I want to be clear. This had nothing to do with me. I did not initiate this. I had no involvement in this process. I found out about it the same way everyone else in the Dallas real estate legal community found out, through conversation. But the timing was remarkable. Camille had left me for a man whose professional life was beginning to crack open at exactly the moment she'd tied herself to him. The life he'd promised her, the dinners, the travel, the energy, the visibility, was built on a foundation that was not as solid as it appeared. I don't know what happened between them after that. I genuinely don't. That's her life. I stopped tracking it the way you stop tracking something that no longer belongs to you. What I know is this. The $37 million deal I closed for Brent Holloway became one of the most referenced cases in my firm's commercial real estate practice. It opened doors to 3 additional major clients. It was the kind of professional win that compounds, that builds on itself, that makes the phone ring. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was offered a named partnership at Meridian Legal Group. I took it. I want to tell you something that I've been thinking about for a long time. Something I couldn't have said in those first weeks when I was standing in the bay window kitchen with cold coffee in my hand. I was not a perfect husband. I want to say that plainly, without excusing Camille or minimizing what she did. I worked too much. I came home and disappeared into my office. I told myself that building financial security was an act of love. And maybe it was, but it wasn't the only form love takes, and it wasn't the form she needed. A marriage failing is almost never one person's fault entirely. That's not a comfortable thing to say. It's easier to be the wronged party, the innocent one, the person who got blindsided through no fault of their own. And in some ways, I was that person. But I was also a husband who had been emotionally absent for years while congratulating himself on being financially present. I needed to know that. I needed the floor to come out from under me before I would look at it honestly. Here is what I know now. Sitting in my new apartment in uptown Dallas with a view of the city I've been working in for 19 years, I am better at sitting still. Not great at it yet. I don't want to pretend I've had some clean transformation, but better. I take walks in the morning before I open my laptop. I have dinner with Ryan when he comes through town, and I leave my phone in my coat pocket. I went to therapy for the first time in my life at 43 years old, and I sat in a chair across from a woman named Dr. Anita Reeves and said out loud, for the first time, that I had spent most of my adult life confusing productivity with worth. She nodded like she'd heard this before. Which she had, probably. But it still took me 43 years to say it. I want to tell you about the morning I packed my things out of the Frisco house for the last time. I'd arranged it on a Saturday in early December. Camille wasn't there. She'd agreed to be elsewhere that morning. Ryan drove up from Austin and helped me move boxes into a storage unit. My colleague Patricia came too, which I hadn't asked for, and which I was grateful for. We worked in silence mostly. There's a particular quality to packing up a life that has ended. The way you have to touch every object and make a decision about it. This goes. This stays. This I don't know what to do with. I put things in boxes and labeled them with a Sharpie and loaded them into Ryan's truck, and I did not let myself think too much about any of it. The last thing I took was a mug. Not the one from that morning. I'd left that one in the cabinet. A different one. A plain gray one I'd bought years ago at a gas station on a road trip. One of those inexplicably durable objects that outlast everything around them. I stood in the kitchen with the bay window one last time. The morning light came in exactly the way Camille had always said it would. She'd been right about that. I put the mug in a box. I closed the door behind me. I started over in a way I hadn't expected to, which is to say honestly. I've dated since the divorce. Nothing serious yet. I'm not in a hurry. Which is new for me, because I've always moved quickly, always had a target and a timeline. But I've learned to sit in uncertainty in a way I couldn't before. It's uncomfortable. It's also, I think, the thing I was missing. The professional chapter has opened up in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The partnership, new clients. A case last spring that went to mediation and settled for a number that made the front page of the Dallas Business Journal. I'm working on something that matters to me now. A pro bono initiative with a legal aid organization that helps small business owners navigate commercial leases. People who don't have the resources to protect themselves from the exact kind of contingency clause manipulation I deal with every day at Meridian. That work, the pro bono work, is the most grounding thing I do every week. Sitting across from a small restaurant owner in East Dallas explaining what a landlord's attorney is trying to do to her in plain language. Watching someone who came in scared leave with information. That's not glamorous, but it's real. People ask me, when I tell them pieces of this story, which I'm careful about, they ask me if I regret how it ended, if I wish I'd fought harder, if I wish I'd seen it coming. I don't regret that it ended. I think that's the honest answer. I think we had run the course of what we could be for each other, and I think staying would have meant two people making each other quietly miserable for another decade before the same ending came anyway. I regret the ways I failed her. I hold on to that not as guilt that paralyzes, but as information I carry into everything I do now. I don't wish her harm. I mean that. Camille is not a villain. She's a person who made choices. Some of them bad ones. Some of them may be necessary for reasons I can't fully see from where I'm standing. I hope she has the life she wanted. I mean that less as a noble thing and more as a practical one. Her happiness and my happiness are no longer connected, and spending energy resenting her is a tax I'm not willing to keep paying. As for Brent Holloway, I haven't spoken to him since the deal closed. His firm moved to different legal representation after the internal audit situation developed. That's appropriate. That's how it should work. I signed his contract. I did my job. That's the whole story there. The part that stays with me most, the thing I keep coming back to, isn't the morning Camille left. It isn't the conference room where the deal closed. It isn't even the moment I found out about Brent. It's a smaller thing. It's the moment in Douglas Hart's office when I made the call to disclose the conflict of interest. I could have said nothing. Nobody knew. The case would have proceeded. The deal would have closed. Brent Holloway would never have had to be told that his attorney had a personal connection to his employee. My firm would never have had to document anything. I knew about it. That was the only reason I said anything. I sat in Douglas's office on a Wednesday morning, and I told him everything. And when he asked if I was asking to be removed from the case, I said no. Not because of anything strategic, not because I wanted to be in the room when Brent Holloway signed his papers, but because the correct answer was no. Because the conflict was real, but not disqualifying. Because the ethical path was disclosure and continuation, not withdrawal on the basis of personal feelings. That's a small thing. A boring thing, probably, compared to the rest of this story. But it's the thing I'm most proud of. When everything else was in free fall, when my marriage was ending, and I was sleeping alone in a too-big house, and I was working 16-hour days to keep from feeling the weight of it, I made the right call on a Thursday morning in a managing partner's office. Not a dramatic call, not a heroic call, just the correct one. My mother used to say that character is what you do when it doesn't benefit you. I used to think that was a cliché. I think now that clichés get to be clichés because they're true. I'm in a different place now than I was 2 years ago. Physically, professionally, personally. The apartment in Uptown is mine in a way the house in Frisco never fully felt. Not because it's better, but because everything in it is exactly where I put it. I wake up early. I still work too much, probably. I'm getting better at leaving the office before the building empties out. I have standing plans with Ryan twice a month that I don't cancel. I have dinner with Patricia and her husband at a restaurant in the Kessler Park neighborhood that she's been trying to get me to try for years, and that is, I will admit, excellent. I think about the bay, window sometimes, the morning light, the cold coffee. I think about what Camille said. He can give me the life you never could. And I think about what I know now that I didn't know then. The life I never could. Maybe. Maybe she's right about that. Some people are matched for each other in a way that creates expansion, and some people are matched in a way that creates slow compression, and neither person is necessarily the villain of that dynamic. Or maybe the life she meant is the one that looked a certain way from the outside. The dinners, the travel, the man with the corner office who calls her by name in front of important people. And maybe that life is exactly what she wanted, and she'll have it, and she'll be happy. I genuinely hope so. What I know is the life I'm building now. Methodical, honest, grounded in work I'm proud of and relationships I've stopped taking for granted. Less impressive from a distance, maybe? Quieter. But mine. That has to be enough, and most days it is. You know what hit me hardest about Harrison's story? It wasn't the betrayal. It was the moment he walked into his boss's office and disclosed the conflict, when nobody would have ever known if he stayed quiet. That's who you actually are. Not who you are when people are watching. Who you are when nobody is. I think a lot of us confuse being loyal with being blind. And we confuse working hard with being present. Harrison did both of those things, and it cost him. If this story made you think about something in your own life, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. New stories every week. See you in the next one.